Our new home?
I know.
As soon as Houston Republican Dan Crenshaw began drawing a congressman's paycheck,
That's a patch I wore on my first deployment in Iraq.
he announced he would forgo that pay to show solidarity with furloughed workers.
Well, I'm on Homeland Security Committee, and I'm on the Budget Committee, so a lot of my work is focused on that. A Green New Deal, $93 trillion, Medicare for All, $32 trillion, federal job guarantees, $543 billion a year. These programs would raise taxes on the American people, period. That's what we know about Democrat priorities. It's also really interesting to note this idea that more must always be better, that the bigger the dollar sign is, the bigger your heart is. There's two big problems with the minimum wage increase to $15. One is the economics of it. I just gave you a little bit of a preview there. The second part is the fact that it is a one-size-fits-all policy from the federal level. That's problematic too. I'm here to have real policy debates. I feel like we're having a policy debate, and I feel like the other side has been having a political debate. A lot of Democrats ran on bringing the country together and ending dysfunction in Washington. And what are they doing? They're bringing dysfunction to Washington.
When you put in these kind of socialist policies, it destroys a country. It happens over and over again. People starve. That is what's happening right now. These failed ideas that keep bubbling up. And it's a real shame to see that we have members of Congress actually defending them.
They're teetering between investigations and impeachment. That's really all they can think about. They really don't care about governing.
He's just doing his job. He's the only adult in the room saying, listen, this is a criminal justice process. My job was to ascertain whether there was a crime committed. You guys are asking me to talk about wrongdoing and character flaws. That's not his job, and he's making that very clear.
This motion to recommit would show the American people that despite the deep and growing differences between us, we can at least agree that the people who vote for us are citizens of this country.
Today we're talking about H.R. 6. What is H.R. 6? It is the DACA bill, okay? It is the fix for dreamers. Here's why I'm voting against it. Basically, you could be a 45-year-old man, you could say that you came here as a teenager, and you could say you're a dreamer. So this isn't really a fix for dreamers, it is pure amnesty. Physical barrier is a part of a multifaceted solution, and I wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal today. And so, do walls work? The answer is very clearly yes. That's exactly.
We're getting ready to pull up on a group of about 50 that we're having to process right now. I probably have 6 agents that are responsible for doing some basic intake sheets. We have transportations. We have a bus that will hold 50 people that will tie us up for probably at least an hour.
Hey everybody, so we're voting on the appropriations bill this week, and meanwhile we still have a border crisis. And I want you all to understand what's really going on with the $4.5 billion that the president has requested to fix the humanitarian crisis on the border. I want you to understand what this money is for, and then you'll ask yourself, why would Democrats be against it? So we finally passed the supplemental bill for humanitarian aid on the border. Now, what we've been hearing for months and months and months is that there was no crisis, that it's a manufactured crisis. Then the narrative became, well, it was a manufactured crisis, but now it's a crisis, but it was because of Trump that it's a crisis, right? It's Trump's making. This is a really dishonest narrative, okay? The reason there's a crisis is because tens and thousands of migrants are coming across the border. When that many people are coming across, it overwhelms us, it overwhelms our resources, it crams everybody into small spaces, it creates living conditions that we're all very upset about. That's why there's a crisis. There is no other reason.
You came here and you toured the area, looking at the flood district, not just for the county, but also some sites from the Army Corps of Engineers?
Right. And so that was last weekend. We were back here, and I would just say up front, one of my biggest priority these next 2 years is flood mitigation.
Things that I'm working on right now is getting $4 billion in funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development released from OMB. We need to be working with the city to be focused on the Kingwood area because it does flood quite frequently, as we all know.
Flooding has been a real problem in Houston ever since its founding, and I didn't join this committee to discuss climate change. As was pointed out earlier, that's not even in this committee's jurisdiction.
Now, it's clear we must do something to protect our environment and combat the effects of climate change. No dispute there. But we don't want to handicap the greatest innovation engine the world has ever known, the U.S. economy. Instead, we want to unleash it.
So just leaving this event we just did on the western side of my district by Langham Creek, where we were able to convince the Army Corps of Engineers not to designate this big sandbar as wetlands, so that Harris County Flood Control District could remove all the silt and hopefully prevent future flooding in this area.
The reason I care deeply about healthcare innovation is because of my mother. Susan Carol Crenshaw died when I was 10, after a 4.5-year battle with breast cancer. My family and I directly experienced the impact that healthcare innovations can have on a person's life.
You're talking about Medicare for All in Houston, Texas, home of Texas Medical Center. I think that's a losing argument because these things would cost hundreds of thousands of jobs. It would cost the Texas Medical Center to lose funding. It would cause hospitals to close, doctors to quit their jobs. None of these things are good for Houston, so I'd be very surprised if these messages were actually resonating in Texas.
Counterintuitively, this system ends up hurting patients with the most unique conditions, also known as patients with pre-existing conditions, because their care requires flexibility and innovation, both of which are drastically reduced in a single-payer system.
Why is this bill called the Protection for the People with Pre-Existing Conditions Act? Because this is the height of cynicism. This is the height of political cynicism. Democrats are trying to get people to think that we as Republicans are voting against this because they're trying to get people to think that we're against protection for pre-existing conditions. That's not true at all. We're against bad policy. And this is both bad policy and political cynicism. It's a lie, it's dishonest, and it's really sad to see.
I think first of all, we got to bring awareness to it. I'm glad that there is some awareness being brought to it. You know, there's those of us who go overseas, but it's often, and people thank me for my service, and when we thank veterans for their service, but we're not always thanking the families, and in many ways the families have a much harder job. They wake up every day back in their normal lives. They're not sure what's happening to their loved ones overseas, and then when they do come back, they're totally changed, especially in the caregiver sense. You know, you can ask my wife what she's had to deal with over the years. You know, it's extremely hard, but you'd be amazed at the caregiver community, the spouse community. She had her friends right there with her right away. Some of her friends, by the way, had lost their husbands just a couple years earlier. I mean, this is the kind of tight-knit community that occurs in the in the military, and we should be proud of that. But we should always be looking for ways to help them.
The fundamental truth about D-Day is that it was a point in history where America decided to lead. And ever since, the world has become a better place by every single measure. And yet we find ourselves in this moment right now where we actually have to fight back this idea that America was founded on bad principles, that America, as its founding ideals, have no place in this world anymore. You see that. You hear it from the halls of Congress.
If you're criticizing Israel, but you're doing it in a way that implies that Jewish people in America have a dual loyalty, that's anti-Semitism. It's okay to say whatever you want, actually. It's a free country. And it's also okay for the rest of us to say, we don't like what you're saying.
It's not fun to have to wake up every day and think, okay, what do I need to respond to? Because we'd rather be messaging on all of the issues that, frankly, you and I have just been talking about. We want to be talking about what's the next piece of legislation that matters. But instead, we have a week in the House of Representatives where there was actually a vote to impeach Trump. There was a vote to hold the Attorney General in contempt. And there was a vote to condemn tweets. That is not working for the American people.
It is identity politics. It's this temptation to divide us up into different groups, whether that be based on race or gender or some other category, and then pit those groups against each other and compete for power accordingly. The way America should be is that the only colors that matter are red, white, and blue.